no drama.
Well, that's good. That's really good. That's a really great way to live your life. We welcome today Dr. Chip Thomas, aka Jetsonorama, and he is without drama. He's going to tell us all
Your
about
life.
his artwork, and also I'm really excited to hear firsthand about your trip across Africa. I know that was some decades ago, but I just think that that is just the coolest thing. And you're going to talk a little bit about COVID and how it's affected the Navajo Nation and where you are in your clinic there. It sounds like it's very busy, and especially so because of the holidays. So again, thank you, Chip Thomas, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So you're a photographer, a public artist, and a primary healthcare physician, and you coordinated the Painted Desert Project. And so we're going to talk about the Painted Desert Project, your artwork generally, and a lot more. So since 2009, you've been pasting enlarged photographs on various structures, from fruit stands to abandoned buildings. I'd love for you to
Did
talk
you say
about
fruit stands?
fruit stands. Yeah, I listened to different interviews and I thought that's true. Is that true? Fruit
No.
stands? Oh, okay.
No,
I
they are
must have listened to
roadside
it.
stands, but I do want to
Roadside
acknowledge and thank you for doing the background work that you did. Yeah, I truly appreciate that. Out of the many times I've been interviewed, I don't know that anyone's asked me, that anyone's taken the time to check out that video about the bicycle trip. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah, it was great. And listening to your various interviews, and you know, they're all interesting and they all sort of touch on different points. So I hope that doesn't sound obsessive fanny of me, but
No,
I'm just
no,
I
no.
love
Yeah.
it's
So
so cool.
I see you as an investigative journalist who took the time to do your homework that many people don't do. So again, thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So can you talk about your mission behind this work and then how it evolved or sort of morphed into this Painted Desert Project, and why you chose this medium?
Yeah. Well, right. So let's see where to begin. I came to the Navajo Nation, to Nebekea, Northern Arizona in 1987. I had a four-year scholarship. The government, the federal government, paid for my medical school education. And I knew that I would have to work in a health shortage area upon completion of my medical training. And a dear, dear friend from medical school named Peggy Crawley was working here with her husband. She's a physician. And so I was invited to come work here. And so I came in 87. My next door neighbor at the time was a dentist, great fellow, still a close friend of mine. His name is Ken Ogawa. And Ken had a black and white darkroom. And I'd been shooting black and white since junior high school. But I never really knew what I was doing in terms of actually exposing the camera. And I had gone into a darkroom once before. So I decided, I don't know if you know the expression shedding or wood shedding from the jazz
No.
community. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a great term. So Sonny Rollins is a great example of this, tenor saxophonist who I think in the 60s it was that he literally dropped out of the jazz scene in New York, went away to the countryside for, I don't know what period of time, but months. And, came back like fully formed and having moved his art form to a different level. So being kind of isolated away on the Navajo Nation, it really has been an opportunity to engage curiosities and passions that I have, like how to properly expose a camera, how to develop film. So as often as possible, I'd go out into the community and spend time with people to, just hear their stories and appreciate what their lives are like. And to the extent possible, I've photographed and come back, go straight to the dark room. And I did that for 22 years, but I've always had a passion for street art, so I started my family practice residency in West Virginia in 1983, which isn't that far from New York City. In 83, in fact, I think it was 83 that the movie Beach Street came out. I don't know if that means anything to you or anyone in your audience, but and I think a year before that, Wild Style came out. So these are like hip hop classics. But it was an introduction to the country, to the world, really, of this new art form that was emerging in New York City of, emceeing, breakdancing, and graffiti art. So I would travel from West Virginia to New York City looking for painted walls, looking for painted trains, going to gallery shows. So there was always a love for street art, But I came out here, I pursued black and white photography. And then, well, since you mentioned the bike trip, yeah, I'd been here for 5 years, and I got a call one day that seemed somewhat random, asking if I was interested in being the team physician for a bicycle trip from the top of Africa, 12,000 miles to the bottom. Did it. But every 5 to 6 years after that, I try to take time away from where I live and work here in Northern Arizona in Diné-Bikéyah to travel to different parts of the world, to get out of my comfort zone. And 2009, I was in Brazil for 3 months, fell in with a community of people making street art, and they showed me work online of the French artist JR, who had done an amazing installation in Rio the year before in 2008 with women's faces and eyes pasted onto a favela, Providencia, I think. And yeah, so I saw that, and that was like a game changer for me because someone had bridged, the world of black and white photography with large scale street art. And when I came back from that trip, I just, was burning with a passion to figure that out. That's a long answer to your question. I promise they won't all be quite that long.
Yeah, yeah, I really relate to that because when I was a teenager, I took a photography class as like a junior high school student, and then just going to like the LA Museum of Art and the Modern Museum of Contemporary Art in downtown LA, and growing up going to see all these installation works, I was just like really fascinated. And then, in Los Angeles, there's a lot of mural artists, and I would just be so happy every time I would like turn a corner and see either a lot of beautiful graffiti or, a combination of like art and graffiti. And a lot of like, some people have wondered about your art because sometimes it winds up on places where there's graffiti, and it's like there's a question of whether it's like which came first, and yeah, I mean, it's just really beautifies the place, and it really stands out, especially with a natural background like such.
Yeah.
In the case with your art, it's pretty amazing. So
yeah, well, thanks for that. But I just want to follow up on something you
yeah,
said real quickly. I mean, I think that's one of the things that really resonated deeply with me visiting Brazil for the first time in 2004 was, there's just in many of the cities of Brazil, there's an abundance of street art. So I was blown away initially just by the volume of art. And it isn't, I mean, there's Pinchaçal, which is stylized writing, but so it isn't all I can't think of the word, figurative, but so the quality of the work also impressed me, and the fact that the city government seemed to tolerate it struck me. But the thing that really resonated with me was just the way I felt whenever I saw it. It just felt like this place is dynamic. This place, has a certain energy. And yeah, so it literally spoke to me.
yeah.
Kind of like, yeah.
Well, it's constantly evolving, right? I mean, in Venice, they actually made where I was born, they have like I don't know, a skate park now actually, but it used to just be kind
Oh,
of like dilapidated, rundown buildings that people would just be spray painting on. But they have this evolving few walls where people are just constantly reinventing it, and it's kind of
yeah,
an interest. It's a cool community that people feel welcome to the
yeah,
space.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what part of Brazil was this?
Well, yeah. So, it's funny too, because like even as a kid, I remember watching Pele play soccer, for the Brazilian national team on black and white TV. Um, and then going out and chasing a ball around by myself, pretending to be Pele. And this was when I was in primary school. And then I remember the first coming of bossa nova in the early 60s, so there's always been just a resonance with me with Brazil. So let's see, the first time I went, 2004, I spent a few days in Rio, but then pretty quickly went up to Bahia, to Salvador. But the music form that really touches me is maracatu, but maracatu, which comes from Recife and Olinda, which is north of Salvador.
Mhm.
And yeah, so those are the main parts that I visited. Um,
Is it more rhythmic?
well, I mean, so from the bottom of Brazil to the top, it is rhythmic.
Well, I mean,
My other,
I sing bossa nova, and I have a lot of actually Brazilian friends here, like from
yeah,
Rio and from Bahia, and dancer friends too. And so
right.
I've explored, and on my like music shows I've explored different ones, but I don't think I've ever encountered hearing that. So I was just like I was picturing like the zebra instrument with the teeth that rattle in the bone,
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. No,
the
so
donkey, things like
my,
that.
my, Rakatu is interesting in that the dance form and the rhythm apparently have a strong connection. I want to say to the Congo in Southwest Africa, um, and the enslaved people of Brazil in the 1800s would make costumes and pretend to be members of the Portuguese court because, Brazil was colonized by several countries, but most recently Portugal. And they would dress up and parade and appear to be people of the Portuguese court, but really had the positions of African royalty represented with flag bearers and the king and the queen. Um, and yeah, so they danced and drummed to a rhythm. The first time I heard it actually was during Carnival in Bahia, 2004. And it starts with an instrument called the gongue, which is two cowbells of different pitches. And the first time I heard that, I got goosebumps. And it was like I had to find out what this rhythm is. Yeah.
I understand. There's like a really haunting. I don't know if the bear and bow is used in any of that, but I know that like has like
Not
a
so
very
much.
haunting, haunting thing
Yeah.
that calls a lot of people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very cool. So, so I know that with the Painted Desert project, or at least I thought it did, like, did you bring in other artists for that? Because I guess there was one, I guess somebody can do too much research because I was watching somebody talk about their like theories.
Your theory?
Their theories about your work.
Okay. I
Well,
would
well,
I would
first of
love to
all,
hear more about that.
okay. Well, I would just could you talk about your mission to bring people together a little more? Because like I know that's really important to you, and I know that
Yeah.
like you kind
Yeah,
of took
yeah.
this background
So
as a physician working with people and being inside the community and photographing them and it being like a very intimate experience to like, make these statements. And, I know that there was like some resistance because of some of the images that you used at first and you were anonymous at first. So if you could kind of talk about that.
yeah, okay. And I'll try to stay on point here. Right. So I started my public art project 2009, But nationally and internationally, there were mural festivals or public art festivals happening in different places. One of the ones that really intrigued me was called the Underbelly Project, where an artist by the name of a conceptual artist by the name of Jordan Seeler. And I don't know if RJ Rushmore was one of the curators for that, but I can't think of the name of the blog, the street art blog that Vandalog, yeah. So anyway, these guys, over the course of a year, invited street artists from all over the world to come to New York City, and then they would sneak them down to an abandoned subway station. So it was part, urban exploration and mural making, but it was all done underground during the night. And then at the end of about a year, Jordan and I think RJ, the other curator, led just a handful of journalists. I think the guys from Brooklyn Street Art, Jaime and Steve, were amongst the few journalists who were allowed to go down and see this this project. So that was one project of inviting artists that caught my imagination. Another one was called the Boneyard Project, and that was actually done in Tucson. There's an Air and Space Museum, excuse me, where the Boneyard itself actually is a reference to a place where out in the desert, vintage World War II and I guess more recent airplanes that are no longer in use or left in the desert to just deteriorate. But as a fundraising program, the curators or the director of the Air and Space Museum partnered with a curator out of New York City to invite street artists from all over the world to come and paint murals on these airplanes, and then they charge people to see it and raise money. So I had a fascinating opportunity in my middle school years. I went to a very small alternative Quaker boarding school, and the whole emphasis of this was on building community, identifying interests and talents of people within the community, and then trying to figure out a way to bring those resources together to improve the community for everyone, right? So I was talking with a friend at the time, and we actually came up with this idea about the same time. And it's like, hey, why don't we invite some of our favorite street artists to the Navajo Nation, have them come out, spend some time, and paint murals on roadside stands. Because what I learned in putting my pictures on these roadside stands was that I live between the Grand Canyon and the Monument Valley, so there's a lot of tourist traffic. And vendors were telling me that more tourists were stopping if there was art on these stands. So that's how the Painted Desert Project started, with the purpose of trying to find people in the community who were interested in learning muralism and having an opportunity to mentor or be mentored by some of the visiting artists. And that has been happening. Not to the extent that I would like, but there was one artist in particular, Daniel Josley, who is a neighbor of mine actually here on the reservation, who is quite an outstanding muralist who worked with several of the artists that I brought out. Yeah. But we've also had artists come out and spend time in local schools, leading workshops and meeting with groups of students here on the nation during the summer as well. Yeah. So we're trying to spread the love and spread art.
Well, the art is fabulous, and folks can see your work at your website, jetsonorama.net. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, but for those
okay
now.
Will you share with me what some of these theories are of my art making?
Okay. So So one guy didn't seem to do much research, and then like maybe halfway into his exploration of different pieces, like he was driving from place to place. I mean, I don't know if he was just doing that for a sort of dramatic effect, so that could have been, but he didn't, do any research. But he seemed to be, making guesses as to what your artwork was about, and then I don't know, he was just talking about these different mural artists, and then when I mentioned it, I was afraid that I had misinterpreted it, but I did think that you had brought everybody together for this project, and anyway. So I like, the last thing I did was like not, it was just like watch this guy's little video, because I have friends that just took an RV to Arizona, and they're
Yeah.
going kind of like hopping around from park to park. And so I was like, oh, you got to check this website out. And then I thought, oh, I know how to get them. I'll like send them a YouTube video. So there you go.
All right.
Maybe I said too much.
No.
so, so, um, so one of your exhibitions was Unsilenced, Indigenous Enslavement in Southern Colorado. Can you talk about the Indigenous people's enslavement in America? Because it's really not a widely known story. Um, and in the West, for years after the Civil War, after African heritage people were freed, Indigenous Americans continued to be held in captivity. So you tell the story of Lafayette Head, which I think is just a really remarkable story. So
Yeah, man, I don't even know. Okay, let me preface all of this by saying, if anyone has any interest in this topic, there are a couple books that come to mind. One of them is Captives and Cousins by historian James Brooks. And this one really focuses more on Native enslavement in the Southwest, a more comprehensive book that looks at the enslavement of Native people in the Americas from the time of the Columbus expedition, 1492, actually up to present day. Debt peonage, sex trafficking, is a book by Andreas Resendez called The Other Slavery, which is just has a wealth of information. So yeah, I mean, the short of my involvement in this project is there is a fort in southern Colorado that was built in 1858, I believe, may have been 1853. It's called Fort Garland. Interestingly, it's at the foot of one of the sacred mountains for the Dene. And I'm spacing on the name of the, it's Mount Blanca. But yeah, so in the 1850s, the Colorado Gold Rush, for example, started in 1859. So there was more westward expansion. The Manifest Destiny principle was in full effect, and as settlers came west, they were basically taking land and animals that had been hunted by Native people from them. And then, we're trying to get the support of the federal government to protect them from Native people who were trying to maintain their way of life. So this fort was built, and so there was a campaign. I don't know how much of this history folks know, but 1864, Kit Carson, I forget his rank in the US Army at the time, led a campaign, a pretty brutal campaign against the Dene here, where he, in order to move people out of the way so settlers could settle and keep going west to California, rounded the Dene up and force marched people 300 to 400 miles from here to southern New Mexico and placed them in a very small, basically prison camp for about 3 or 4 years. And actually, one of the first examples of it's not of scorched earth, of a scorched earth military campaign was practiced by the U.S. cavalry against the Dene when their crops were all burned and people were, starved, so they would be taken on this expedition. Not expedition, but yeah, when they were forced marched to the camp of enslavement. But one of the things that was happening as people were being forced marched to the Bosque Redondo in southern New Mexico is warring tribes of the Dene were basically poaching people to be sold into bondage. And unlike African slavery and Native enslavement, there's always been an emphasis on children and women. The nature of the work is different. The work that was done by enslaved Native people was more around the homestead, as opposed to, being out in the fields from Cancy to Cancy. So what happened in southern New Mexico is the fort was built. Lafayette Head, as you said, had migrated to southern. Actually, he migrated first to New Mexico, to Abiquiu, which is where I can't think of the name of the artist who made her home there. But anyway, he was there. He was like a trader in a trading post. And he was interacting primarily with the Ute tribe, with members of the Ute tribe. And he went on to be, 1853, I know he moved from Abiquiu to southern Colorado to a town called Conejos. And he moved with 50 Mexican families and they settled the area. And during that time, he became the Indian agent, kind of the federal overseer for the Jicarilla Apache, as well as the a band of Utes. And okay, so we're talking now about the 1860s. 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing African slaves. The Civil War had started 1861, it stopped 1865. So about the time the Civil War stopped, President Andrew Johnson was hearing about the enslavement of Native people in the Southwest and asked all the Indian agents in the Southwest to do a survey in their respective counties of all the enslaved Native people. Interestingly, the only agent to follow through with this assignment was Lafayette Head. So he did a survey for two counties, Costilla County and Conejos County in southern Colorado, and came up with a total of about 142 names of enslaved people, which was submitted to Andrew Johnson. And in so doing, the first time he turned the report in, he did not include any of the enslaved people in his own household or the household of his friends and neighbors, which was later corrected in the second version of the survey. So I was introduced to this ledger, this survey that was created by Lafayette Head by the former historian for the state of New Mexico, Esteban Real Galvez. And his brother Ronald is an architect who's known as Adobe Ron because his specialty is building adobe buildings. And but he's also attempting to identify historic adobe buildings in southern Colorado, purchase them and restore them. And one of the places he purchased or he identified was the home of Lafayette Head, which was the agency for the Jicarilla Apache and the Utes. So Ron and Esteban took me and showed me the home of Lafayette Head, and attached to it was a small building which they speculated was the home of the enslaved people. But they also showed me Esteban showed me on his phone, and Ron may have had a tablet or a copy of the list that Head sent to President Johnson in 1865. And the thing that struck me was how beautifully it was written. It turns out that Head's mother was a school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Missouri, and her children and kids, she emphasized penmanship. And, so you've got this really elaborately written document of the names of the captive enslaved people, their ages, their sex, what tribe they were bought from. And one of the other things that I thought was especially poignant in this list was the question that was asked, willingness to return to tribe. And a remarkable number of people, anywhere from ages, say 4 on this list to maybe age 44, 64, there were some fairly old people. 3/4 of them said no, they were not willing to return to their tribe, which was confusing for me. And I asked the an historian at Fort Garland by the name of Eric Carpio, who is the museum director. And he made a really good point. It's like, we have no idea, what the circumstances were when that question was asked to an enslaved person. We don't know who else was in the room, what eye contact was or was not being made to say, you better answer this question correctly. But yes, I mean, just having an opportunity to tell an historical story like this using artifacts from that period in the home of Kit Carson. Well, that was a fascinating thing as well. So Kit Carson, like I said, was at Fort Garland from 1866 to 1868. He was just there for 18 months, but he was there with his Danae's son, whose name was Juan, and his wife, Josefa, who got Juan in exchange for a horse. Apparently, that wasn't uncommon. But Juan was there at the fort with his dad, Kit Carson, during the 18 months he was there. So for 69 years at the museum, at Fort Garland Museum, there was in the commandant's quarters where Kit Carson lived, there was an exhibition that had, like a mannequin of him sitting at a desk, signing some official documents, but every room in this building was devoted to the life and times of Kit Carson. So the museum decided they wanted to decenter the settler colonial narrative and focus more on people from around the community. So they did away with everything related to Kit Carson, because what was happening was many people who look like you in this community, who had heard all of their lives that they were of Spanish descent from the conquistadors or of Mexican descent from the 1800s, were getting DNA swabs done and getting results back indicating that they were 1/16 or 1/8 native, and not knowing anything about this because they'd always been led to believe they were, Spanish or Mexican. So conversations were starting to happen within families of, several generations ago, there was this captive person in our family. So the museum did a series of listening sessions where they asked people from the community. They did these listening sessions via Zoom to share some of these stories, to bring pictures forward, and to have an opportunity to, I guess, address some of this intergenerational trauma, but also this hidden history, with the purpose of doing an exhibition about it. And I was very fortunate to be asked to take part in this project.
Yeah, it's very cool. And it needs to be done more and more. I mean, I think we we got a little bit of an overhaul at our Plymouth plantation now. It's called Plymouth Patuxet. So, it honors the indigenous name. And, I mean, it still has a little ways to go to really, I think they're trying to not be political. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it's hard to not be political though. I mean, about, a topic like this is, yeah.
So, you and I talked a little bit earlier about some of your experience, just a lot of people right now still coming in with COVID and how, that makes people's wait times much more and just increases the sort of intensity of the situation. A new study published in Science Direct um, estimates that 56 of the 60 million pre-Columbian indigenous people in the Americas were killed by European diseases and violence by 1600, and that's about 10% of the world population at the time. So as a physician serving the Navajo Nation, what are your thoughts on how strains of COVID have impacted indigenous populations? So like, what are you seeing at your clinic, and what are some of the unique challenges that you face being on the reservation?
It's almost not a fair question. There's so much to unpack. And I'll try to be concise.
Right. Severely limiting.
So,
You can't write a dissertation.
yeah, right. So, whenever I talk about being here, I appreciate that a lot of people I talk with don't necessarily know a lot about this area. So let me just take a step back and do a quick overview. The Navajo Nation is 27,000 square miles in size, is larger than the state of West Virginia, is home to roughly 180,000 people, so it's not densely populated. Scattered over the 27,000 square miles, there are 13 full service supermarkets, something other than a quick pick. But it was determined that what is being sold in those 13 supermarkets, over 80% of it has little to no nutritional value. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that on the nation, there is coal, oil, natural gas, uranium, and water and aquifers, and also timber. But with these natural resources, one would think that the streets would be paved with gold, and yeah, that there would just be an abundance of material wealth here. But because the reservation is treated very much like a colony, the wealth of the nation is in countries elsewhere because, there are multinational corporations taking advantage of these resources. So as I talk to you, roughly 25% of my patients still don't have running water or electricity, okay? Even though there's coal, oil, natural gas, uranium, and water and aquifers here. So everybody with those resources here should have running water and electricity. So when the pandemic came, because the president of the Navajo Nation, Jonathan Nez, I thought made a beautiful comment, and a somewhat sad and poignant comment, in that the virus exploited one of the greatest strengths of the Dene, of the Navajo people, which is their emphasis on ke, or kinship, family, relationships. So it's not unusual here to have multi-generational homes where you'll have grandma, grandpa with their kids and grandkids. So in that context where there are, many people in a home or living close together in a family compound, with challenges regarding running water and electricity, it wasn't surprising that when the virus appeared here, late March of 2020, it literally exploded. So by the end of March 2020, April, New York City and New Jersey were leading the country with the most number of cases per 100,000. But by June of 2020, the most cases per 100,000 in the United States was here on the Navajo Nation. But by the same token, less than a year later, once a vaccine was introduced, and by February of 2021, there were over 90% of people eligible for the vaccine were vaccinated. So I think I heard a figure this morning that roughly 1,600 people of the 180,000 have perished from due to the pandemic. And sadly, a lot of these are older people, not necessarily all older people. I mean, I know, people across the spectrum who have passed away, but these are also knowledge keepers, especially the older people, who know the traditions, the songs, the ceremonies for healing and wellness. So, I mean, it's been a difficult time. One of the questions you said you were going to run by me was, I was chosen to be a participant in a project by the UN to come up with a community-based art project that would give a community an opportunity to grieve and, to perhaps start the healing process. But, one of the things that occurred to me early on, because the UN asked why I thought it was important to do such a project, I really had to take a step back and, ask, is it important that the UN do such a project? If we're talking about, people who have been on this continent for 15,000 to 40,000 years, depending on which anthropologist you read, these are people who have been through pandemics, who have been through plagues, who know resiliency. So, a better question might be, what can we learn from them in going through such a pandemic, even though this pandemic has such a devastating impact on the community?
Yes, indeed. So, so then what did you do with this project? Did you turn it on its head? Have you been asking?
No, quite the opposite, which is why I was saying maybe we shouldn't talk about this. So what I did was I didn't want to be accused of appropriation. I didn't want to be accused of having taken money from the UN that could have gone directly to Dene communities. So I brought together a small team of activists and artists to process, what approach we might take, how we might engage community. But, again, in a place that has infrastructure issues such as, there's issues with broadband connectivity, especially if 25% of the population doesn't have electricity. So trying to meet with community members during the pandemic has proven challenging. So my committee, my team, to come up with the project for grieving and to start the healing process still exist. Hopefully we'll have better luck in 2022, but it also occurred to me along the way that I need to take care of my mental health and wellness as I go through this pandemic and its challenges.
Yeah, it sounds like you're very overextended as it is with with all of your work as a doctor in the midst of COVID still. So, and not to mention, I mean, all of the issues. It sounds like 13 supermarkets for the Navajo Nation, bigger than West Virginia, is not anywhere near sufficient enough to provide people with healthy and fresh food. That's kind of funny. I thought it was for fruit stands instead of roadside stands that would have what are
no, but that's so. But
that kind of thing, because maybe that would make a difference if there was
right.
proliferating. So.
Yeah, but we actually my team talked with people who are doing permaculture land rematriation work to see if there's a way we can support their efforts to literally reconnect people with the land to grow more food. But yeah, it's an ongoing effort.
Yeah, I think yucca and things like of that variety are more the things that really grow easily in the desert, right? It's a there aren't a lot of orchard opportunities, so you have to really like bring water, right?
Yeah,
Like
well, but yeah, by the same token, I mean, again, one of the resources here is water and aquifers.
Mhm.
So there are canyons where there are natural springs. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it is a high desert environment. So the majority of the land is arid and not really suitable for farming. Yeah. So, I mean, people here historically were foragers. They were moving from point A to point B seasonally to collect herbs and food. Um, and, that way of life has been disrupted with people living in settlements, towns, villages. Yeah.
Right, right. So, can you talk a little bit about the uranium mining? There was an art project that you did around it, and it'd be interesting to share. And also
Okay.
for folks that are just joining us now, Jetsonorama is your alias, your art name, and your website is Jetson, as in Jetson, Norama, and that's .net. So folks can find a lot of beautiful images. Very cool
Thank
project.
you. How many followers? How many people do you think are following this? It's just me and you
I
talking,
don't
or
know because we don't have mutual friends, so I'm not getting like the and
we
so
don't have any mutual friends?
no, I don't think so. So somehow I have it set to like when it's probably going to I tried to share it with you on
Yeah.
your website, so we'll see. But people watch afterwards for sure, but I don't know how much people. I mean, like I can't figure that out how much people are watching in real time. I'm not sure if it's
Yeah.
because of, yeah. But I
All
did make
right.
it public on my side.
Okay. So, short answer to your question about the history of uranium mining here on the Navajo Nation, Diné Bikéyah. Well, okay, so one thing that people get confused is they think that the uranium ore that went into the atomic bomb in Nagasaki, Hiroshima, came from Diné Bikéyah or other native lands where it was being mined. But actually, that ore came from Southern Africa, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. But the Manhattan Project and the ore for the Arsenal for Democracy, aka the Cold War from 1944 to 1984. I think about 70, no, actually only 40% of that ore came from Navajo lands. But there were over 500 mine sites, and each mine site could have anywhere from 1 to 10 different areas that were being, excavated for uranium ore. But because the mining companies were using mining laws that were put in place in the 1800s for mining precious minerals, they didn't have to clean up their sites when the price of the uranium ore dropped in the 80s and they all like closed shop and left. So unfortunately, there's over now 500 abandoned uranium mine sites, which are contaminating water sources, the land, crops, animals, and ultimately people. So rates of various cancers, respiratory problems are higher here than in the general population. Fortunately, the EPA just gave to the Navajo Nation this past year in 2021, I think enough money to clean up 10% of the uranium mines that have been abandoned. So yeah,
Wow, that's really something. I mean, if people don't understand, I think it's yeah, it's something really needs to be done about this. I mean, I know that people shy away from the word reparation sometimes, but it's like, building infrastructure and making up for lost time is what the brothers and sisters of this planet, people who are in and have the ability to make some changes around this, really need to step up, because corporations controlling indigenous populations and is only happening because we're letting it happen, collectively. It's so anyway, I didn't need to say that, but it's it's time. The earth, we need to clean up the earth. Like, the earth will live without us, but if we want to stay on it, we've got to do something.
Yeah.
um
Well, yeah. Yeah.
so I would love to end this on a high note. In 1992, as you had mentioned very briefly, you were a Trek physician on a Guinness Book of World Records, breaking almost 12,000, just shy, just shy of 12,000 miles. And you biked 7 to 80 miles a day from the tip of North Africa, yes, to the Cape. Yes, Guinness Book. Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
in South Africa. So can you talk about that, what that experience was like? Again, you could write a whole book on it, but could you talk about what it was like to be carrying all, like, 100 pounds of weight through the Sahara, and like trying to keep everyone healthy?
Yeah. I just want to say never, and persistence pays, because yeah, I had never done anything like this before. There were two white American cyclists, the Buettner brothers, Dan Buettner and his brother Steve. I was the third American cyclist. And then the fourth position was split between two cyclists from the African continent, Mobalaji Oduyoye from Lagos, and Michael Impiangu from Uganda, Kampala. And so they split the trip. Mobalaji was with us for the first half because he had studied to be a pastry chef in France and spoke French. And then he cycled with us to Uganda, where Michael Impiangu, who speaks Swahili, was with us for the second portion of the trip down to South Africa. So it was, it was just one of the most mind-blowing things I've ever done. And like I said, there were many times I was ready to cycle to the closest town and pack my bags and fly back to the States, because I was just, on a regular basis getting my butt kicked. A funny thing, okay, so in the 70s when I was in college, there was the Nestle boycott, because Nestle was paying women in developing countries to put on nursing outfits and to go into hospitals and to maternity wards and to pass out free samples of Nestle formula to women who had just given birth. And they would get maybe a month's worth of formula, just enough that if the woman used it every day, by the time she ran out of formula, her breast milk would dry up. And, so women were trying to stretch the packets out, and they were diluting them. They were using water that wasn't always purified. So in the 70s, there was like a rash from around the world. There was a plethora of infant deaths, all related to this very aggressive marketing campaign on behalf of Nestle. So there was a boycott of Nestle and Nestle products in the 70s, and I took part in that boycott. Okay, so fast forward, it's now 1992. I'm cycling across Africa, and we met a cyclist from Canada who was studying for his graduate degree in physics from Dartmouth, I think. who realized he just needed to defend his thesis and he was done. But he decided to take off 5 months and cycle from the top of Africa to Kenya. So he joined our team. And he said he was getting his energy by getting these cans of Similac, which is the Nestle formula. It's a complex carbohydrate. So I would get these cans of Nestle formula and then go into the market, and frequently the market was just, people sitting on the ground in an area selling their wares, and I would look for smoke coming from, so what these women would do, women who had bees would have honey in a big vat. And in order to keep bees away from their honey they were selling, they would make a fire to smoke the bees away. So I was able to identify and I would get jars of honey, and then I would, in my water bottles, mix the Nestle formula with the honey. And I went from being the slowest, most miserable cyclist on our team to being the lead cyclist every day. So I'm not advocating for Nestle products, but I am saying, I guess, never say never, and persistence pays. So, but yeah, we finished in South Africa in August of 1993. We were in Cape Town on the same day Amy Elizabeth Bill, the 26-year-old student from Stanford, was bludgeoned to death in Crossroads. We had a meeting with Walter Sisulu, who was a minister in the African National Congress, who brought Mandela into the African National Congress, who was on Robben Island with him for 26 years. Mandela was there for 27 years. It was just, yeah, there was, yeah, it was an amazing experience. But the thing that I got from that was the importance of taking time off every 5 to 6 years to leave my circumstances and to get out of my comfort zone. And in order to think outside the box, I just have to occasionally get out of the box. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I have to ask you this question because I'm just really curious why it's reported that in a lot of cultures, like say Morocco, well, there's just a bunch of different cultures that I've heard this is true of in India and the Middle East and various regions, that the women tend to be, at least it looks to outsiders like the women are doing a lot more physical manual labor than the men, and the men will be sitting around drinking like maybe like just a strong coffee and maybe smoking some cigarettes, and the women are like just busting their butts, just like doing everything all day long.
Yeah.
Either at the marketplace or for their farms or some combination of
Yeah.
So what are you did you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a natural tendency for women to nurture. I'm going to be identified as being sexist, but I think, having the experience of giving birth and just being kind of fiercely protective of your offspring and those close to you whom you love, women, I think, just will do anything to protect those they love. And that means, just being the glue of society, holding everything down, holding their families together. But that's a quick reflection without a whole lot of thought.
Okay, and then I know you mentioned briefly your experience in South Africa, and you had I know you'd been really looking forward to it. I mean, not only was it the end of the trip, but it sounded like from an interview that I had heard with you from a long time ago that was like,
yeah,
really a big deal. Did you want to elaborate any more on that?
Well, okay, I mean, yeah, I came of age during the, excuse me, having a little reflux here. I came of age during the anti-apartheid movement. You know, it's like I kind of got my political footing with people like Desmond Tutu, who was one of my heroes in the 80s, you know, who just passed away last week. And Stephen Biko and Mandela, you know, just all these names of people who were fighting for freedom and liberation and equality for their people. You know, were people I respected and looked up to. So to have an opportunity to then go into this place that was still practicing apartheid, yeah, was something I was looking forward to. You know, I mean, I had some very difficult experiences in South Africa, being physically assaulted myself, and but it really helps to, if one has the capacity, has the resources to travel, it really helps to go and to experience things firsthand, because, you know, it was very easy to think of a, I can't think of the word, but a diametric, you know, things being either black or white. But literally to go to South Africa and to meet whites who were members of the ANC, who had sacrificed their lives and their well-being, you know, in the struggle for equality, was enlightening. You know, it's like it wasn't all the whites are against all the blacks, you know, it's like, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Chip Thomas, for being with us today. So grateful.
Thank you for the opportunity, Pandora. Have a great 2022.
Thank you too.
Yeah, rock on.
Rock on.